Welcome back to Tides. Today's conversation is about transformation and why it so often fails in places no one initially expects. Organizations invest in strategy, in digital tools, in AI, but transformation doesn't happen through slide decks or software. It happens or doesn't through people, and specifically through people leaders and managers. And that's where friction begins. Today, I'm joined by Sally Bolig, who has built and scaled manager enablement systems inside fast-growing organizations. And together, we explore what happens when HR shifts from running programs to designing systems, when enablement becomes an operating model and not an event, and when AI forces us to rethink not just tools, but how capability itself is designed, measured, and evolved. So let's get into it. Sally, welcome to Tides.
Thank you. So glad to be here with you.
I think 2026 specifically has put a spotlight on organizations figuring out where are the friction points in their own organizational anatomy that are coming in the way of AI adoption and adapting with AI. So AI is highlighting big friction points. How are you sensing this tension?
I think that some of these areas, even before AI, we could acknowledge, like you said, were sort of like a moment in time. It wasn't allowing for progress. It was more for keeping things on track, right? And some examples of those that I feel are being particularly disrupted by AI or have the potential to operate more efficiently with AI are things like one-on-ones, engagement surveys, and performance reviews, which to date have really felt to most employees, to most organizations, pretty cumbersome and often uncorrelated to employee success. Most people you and I have ever worked with in a people function, most leaders, right, do it because they have to, because they're supposed to, but not because they've necessarily seen it yield the results that maybe we'd hoped for, right? Workforce planning, which you mentioned earlier, is another example. It feels so often like throwing darts at a board. You have to plan at the beginning or the end of your year for your new fiscal year. And then everything goes awry in 1 to 4 months. This is becoming even more disrupted by AI because everybody's job is evolving in real time. So how in the world do we plan at the beginning of the year for an entire year when everything's changing every week, every day? Another is identifying employee skills, right? Tapped and untapped. That is extremely manual today. And often employees are overlooked because it's a conversation with their manager. It's not stored anywhere else. Or if it is stored somewhere else, it's inaccessible when the time really demands that we access it. And another area is, I think, team KPIs have been really they're essential, but they're very siloed. And so often for people leaders like ourselves, we're unable to access those really pivotal items or at least look at them in a lens that allows us to be proactive. All of these are areas, like I said, that I think in the people world have not been operating the way we would have hoped they would for a while now. But that's part of the opportunity with AI. I think we have a whole new way to make these more effective.
Yeah. So what kind of thinking tends to, and I'm sure that it's not like there's shortage of ideas in an organization. And I'm just curious to know from your perspective, what kind of thinking tends to get undervalued as organizations scale, specifically in the context of human resources or people at culture teams?
Absolutely. I think part of it, something I know you and I have spoken about extensively, is this lack of data. I think that the people team is often viewed as one by which gut is the lead indicator, which has, in my opinion, made it very difficult for people teams to prove their tangible value as it pertains to the bottom line of the business. And so that thinking that a people function is more feelings based and more gut based really inhibits us from applying this sort of standardization, this sort of technological influence that I believe is going to help us to be more valued, right? I think that another thing that really slows us down is people are often really set in their ways when it comes to people things. Think about managing people, thinking about hiring people. I would be willing to bet everyone on this call has had as many conversations as we have with hiring managers who really believe they're better interviewers than the people that do this for a living, than the talent acquisition team, because they've done it for years, right? But just like everything else, interviewing is evolving. Managing is evolving. These are things where we need to be keeping up with the pace, but a lot of folks just don't seem to apply that logic they apply to seemingly everything else to people. And I think for that reason, and I know we'll dig into this a bit more, but for those listening to this call, for us, because I know this is really important to us, part of this is going to be about really drawing that correlation between the business bottom line and the people functions and processes and structures that we're looking to evolve. That is our way to get that initial buy-in because again, a lot of people have never viewed people through this lens. So it might feel unnecessarily disruptive to say, we're applying AI to everything else in the organization. Leave this thing alone. We need to harness that data and that power to show our leaders, no, like this impacts absolutely everything you're doing. We can't actually disrupt these other departments with AI. We can't actually track the effectiveness of what this is doing for our organization if we don't also apply it to these people programs.
So, if we look at it from an ecosystem lens, is the ecosystem conducive to empowering AI building and thinking in organizations? Even because I feel like even when organizations are saying that they need to champion curiosity and take risks, many just say it, but when it comes time to supporting those kind of mindsets or behaviors, we might still see friction. So, where are we now, and why do the best people systems stay unfinished?
So when I think about where we are now, where we've been for a while, think about those systems that we discussed, like engagement surveys or performance reviews, right? Those and performance reviews could be through the lens of identifying internal opportunity or assessing a risk or an issue that needs to be resolved, right? Those programs, those essential components to employee development and mobility and manager development and mobility are run by the same people who are responsible for firing, the same people that are responsible for hiring, for reorgs, right? Like these individuals have a lot of other high priority, high risk, urgent things to navigate that will always take precedent over the outcomes associated with an engagement survey. Right. And not only that, but usually something like the outcomes associated with an engagement survey are spread across the entire people team, as well as the managers of the teams that are being impacted, right? So you have all of these different stakeholders that have all of their competing priorities, many of which truly are more time sensitive than this. So it falls by the wayside.
Yeah.
And it's understandable it's gone that way, but I think we're beginning to reach a stage where we can do this more efficiently.
Yeah, yeah. And I've also seen in organizations where, yes, from aspiration perspective, we do want to give access to people data to the right stakeholders so that they can make decisions and choices at grassroots level where the action is really happening. But then there's fear, there's this struggle between the traditional mindset HR mindset of protecting information and data versus giving it to the right stakeholders and becoming that advisor or a consultant to the rest of the business so that they can make better informed choices and decisions. So that also kind of comes in the way. So
Absolutely.
mindset is a very interesting one. And off late, I've been thinking that maybe us sitting in HR, we have not been coached to have a different mindset when we see problems. It's more because we are a risk averse function by definition. No company invested in HR to say, hey, you're going to be the innovation engine for my organization. We were established as a organizational capability many years ago, decades ago, to protect us, to make sure that we make sound choices and judgments and when it relates to people. So it's not like we have the right mindset all the time. And this is where I've been playing with what is the mindset difference between people who sit in the business or in innovation parts of the organization versus when we sit in HR. And I've come up with this thought that when we are in HR, operate, sometimes we don't even operate like a renovator.
Very reactive a lot of the time.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the demand of the hour is for us all to be thinking like architects because the technology that we have at our fingertips is like unlike any that we've had in the past. But are we actually seeing the power of this technology? Are we imagining a different reality? Are we actually thinking about all things that didn't work in the past and applying that architect mindset to adapt with AI? This is where I feel like there's a big gap between how we think about the capability that is at our fingertips.
But there's so much potential. And I think that part of HR, like you said, is this protecting the business and hopefully also protecting the people, right? But part of it is also enablement and empowerment and internal mobility. And so a big opportunity for us to bridge this gap in a way that does correlate directly to the bottom line and does really infuse this interest in AI application is through manager empowerment, manager enablement. And as a result of that, employee empowerment and employee mobility, right? So I think this is an area within the people function where yes, we can still stay sensitive to who has access to what information and what capacity and in what format, but simultaneously empower these people we've always supported through HR in a really enhanced way to make them the best versions of themselves they've ever been and the version of the managers that many of them have always wanted to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking maybe we can help our audience understand enablement a little bit more deeply because if HR has to help with empowerment and enablement, we have to also look at are we set up to do that? And that the more we think about are we set up to do that, the more we'll see that maybe our systems, our processes, our tools, our infrastructure is not conducive to build that enablement ecosystem in our organization. And again, this ties it back to um, HR having to think like product teams. And what happens when HR thinkers approach people systems the way that product teams approach products? Like, are we there? Are we thinking like that? And if not, how should we be applying that product thinking mindset?
I think that we can. And I think that AI has empowered us to do this in a way that we've never been able to before. So, part of what has held back the effectiveness of people programming, in my opinion, is that we've had to create programs and systems that are applicable to this wide swath of individuals, all of whom have different goals and different KPIs. And often, if you make something relevant to everyone, it's not relevant to anyone, right? And I think about this sometimes with like company values, so forth too. But that's a whole other discussion. But when we take into consideration, okay, these goals, now that we have AI and we have the ability to build LLMs and agents, we for the first time have the ability to do something that we never had time for manually, which is gauging success by the metrics of every team and then determining success and potential and opportunity and risk in a way that is actually specific to each of those teams. So what I mean by that is now versus the people team saying, we're going to focus our assessment of success on overall engagement. We can say, we're going to focus our success on whether the sales team is actually hitting their goals, whether the CS team is actually hitting their goals, and the manager's role in that, and the NPS of like the NPS of our managers, right? Like these are things that we can actually start to track at scale, whereas before we just couldn't have done it manually with everything else that we were managing. But how much more powerful is that, right? That's how we start to bring it to the business. That's how we show the bottom line. There's little that's more tangible than the revenue that we're bringing in, right? We can actually begin to tie our people programs to things that tangible.
So look at the outcomes that we are trying to influence and start from there. That's one of the anchors of being a product owner, because as a product owner, I'll always think about what's the value that we need to create for the end customer first. And in this case, the end customer is the business as a whole. And you think about what value we want to create for them. And the same lens applies for managers because managers are a key stakeholder. They are the translation layer, so to speak,
Yes.
between the business outcomes and how individuals contribute to achieve that outcome. So yeah, I love that thinking of as a product owner, first identify who your stakeholders are and what value you want to create for them.
Well put.
And then where do we go from there? Like, what do we do next once we have identified that we need to solve for X stakeholders, and this is how we're going to solve for them?
So, assuming that we have, I assume at this point we have confirmed with the leaders of the business, yes, we agree. These are priorities, right? Once we determine what those are, I think the people team has an opportunity to identify what are all the programs that we've built that influence this? Are there missing ones that we should be developing? And then how do we make these continuously relevant? We think about what's been difficult for people programming in the past. You build the solution, it's often irrelevant within a few months' time. All this energy goes into this thing. The employee sentiment changes. This was the priority in January. Now this is the priority in July. So part of what we assess is, okay, what exists? Part of it is it today actually relevant in an ongoing capacity? And if not, why? How can AI help us to solve that? And then the actual practice of building the agents and different AI tooling to help us track what we've all defined as success and our progress to it. and influencing factors of it. So I think once we understand our audience, their needs, we understand our role in it, that's an important part, right? I think the people team is often sort of tasked with just kind of holding the whole organization up and making everyone happy and all of that, right? Like, what can we actually control? What are we committing to? And then track the progress in real time, change it in real time. It's a lot of work, but now we're actually going to have the data to make good decisions. And the time that we would have spent coming up with those ideas ourselves, we can now spend asking AI if these ideas are the right one, asking one another if this is ethical, really like asking the questions, being curious about what we can do, how we can do it differently. And then, of course, again, most importantly, how do we track if it's actually working?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the time where we should pick one of the many examples that or areas that we identified earlier in our conversation. You mentioned engagement surveys and how they're just, like the data is collected, but it's dead and sitting in somebody's deck and no action is happening at the ground level. Performance is another one. Workforce planning is another one. Which example? I'd love for us to kind of co-create this whole future scenario of if we have to redesign a particular area, how would we go about it? Just to kind of bring it to life for our audience. So, which one would
Absolutely.
you like us to pick up?
I have a couple I'm particularly excited about. Okay, the two that I'm most excited about, one is empowering managers to have more effective one-on-ones and manager strategies. And I think another that's correlated to that is really enhancing internal mobility options. I think let's do that one because we can also correlate it to the manager one-on-ones.
All right. Okay. So I'll paint the current state picture and you help me coach me through how should I rethink internal mobility. So the current state is one, mobility is used as a retention strategy that, hey, if people are leaving, let's have internal mobility in place so that we can find them a different opportunity because there's no transparency in the organizational environment where I as an employee can go in and I can look at my own personal mobility landscape to say, I'm sitting here, this is my point A in the organization, and these are point B, C, Ds that I can explore as I kind of develop new skills or develop new interests. So that's the current state of mobility. So an organization will just go out, buy a talent mobility platform, and throw it in their organizational ecosystem. Clearly, that doesn't meet the need of the hour. The need of the hour for internal mobility is to get the right talent to be solving the right problems at the right time. So how do we go about redesigning
Beautiful.
talent marketplace or mobility from internal mobility to what the organization needs?
Awesome. So one of the big difficulties has been these disjointed systems, right? Theoretically, often we're putting our one-on-one data into, and that's the one-on-one data we remember to write down or include, right? Like into a G sheet. We're doing the periodic reviews within an entire other platform. Even if someone knows the direction they want to go, they often are checking the internal career board every day. And if they are, they're really disengaged by that point already, which might be too late. But everything's very fragmented. The information lives in a lot of different places. We now have the ability to bring all of that information together and to make it more accurate. So I think a big part of this is going to start with what we've frankly already begun to do, but it's recording everything. And this is one of the areas where I think HR gets worried. We're risk averse. We're like, oh my gosh, like that seems like an invasion of privacy. Well, first, let's take into consideration at any one-on-one that is occurring is on company time. It theoretically should be an appropriate conversation to be recorded. But we can also work with our IT teams to say, okay, what version of this content do we want transcribed? If we're talking about our family or we're talking about our dog or, what we did that weekend, scrape that out. Take that information out, but do have this transcription of the entire conversation correlated to Sally. Okay, this is my conversation with my one-on-one and who has access to it and so forth. That's a big part of this, right? IT can help you to determine what versions are accessible to whom. But at the end of the day, now we have real-time information about how is this person performing? What are the outputs they're developing? What are their areas of interest? So what are they already good at? What do they want more access to? Again, in real time, all the time, this is correlated to their profile and to them as an individual. All right, 5 departments over, particularly with AI, roles are changing entirely. We're beginning to blend these positions that have never been blended. We're doing projects we've never even thought could be possible. And through a system like this, where we've recorded everything, it includes their outputs, their one-on-ones, the projects they've developed, their performance reviews. Now the leadership team could actually build the job description or the project description, put it into the system and say, who of our current employees have demonstrated the skills we've deemed necessary for this project? Who in our organization has demonstrated an interest in learning this thing to a greater capacity? Right now, it's going to pull all that data together. You can determine based on that list the follow-up questions you need to ask, whom you need to ask. You equip your manager to be the manager they've always wanted to be. They're now able to come to their employee and say, 3 months ago, you mentioned to me that this was really interesting to you. There's this project on the product team that aligns in these ways. Is it something you're interested in doing? Yes, awesome. Right? That was nearly impossible for us to do as managers with everything else that we were managing. That was nearly impossible for leadership team to do. Nobody at the senior leadership level knows every single person's capabilities, outputs, desires, but AI can, and AI can pull that all together really quickly. And that, whether it's projects, whether it's new jobs, that's the sort of internal mobility that not only keeps people motivated and makes people want to stay, but helps the business. It helps the business thrive. It like brings your best people into the best case scenarios and you'll move better, faster than ever before. So
Yeah,
you
that's
see me
right.
get so excited. That feels
Yeah.
like such a tangible example to me that helps everybody. It helps the employees as much as the managers, as much as the leaders.
100%, 100%. And we just talked about transcribing your one on one conversation. There are so many aspects of touch points between manager and employee that can be digitized to
Yes.
collect more data and more signals. Skills you mentioned are such an easy one, like just
Yes.
dump your employee resume into the LLM that your company
Yeah.
has subscribed to and ask it to create a skills landscape of an employee, work with the IT team, gather all the skills. Because one of the things that I've always struggled with in the past is for internal mobility, for example, when organizations look at pulling the right person for the particular project, gig, assignment, or a long-term move, it's very much based on there's a recency bias because they look the only way an organization can look at employees is through the lens of org chart or who knows who in the organization. And when you look at somebody from the lens of org chart, you just see their current job title,
Yes.
and what they are, how they're contributing to the organization through their current job title. You don't have history on all the jobs that they had, even within your organization. And if you do in your organization, but you still don't know all their career history. Somebody might have worked for 30 years in 10 different organizations, worn like multiple hats. How are we tapping into all that lived experience that employee brings? And which is so important in today's time, to your point, Sally, because we are going to do things that we have not done in the past. Jobs are going to be fluid. Projects are going to come that we didn't imagine that we'll be working on. So the more data signals that we capture, the more information we'll have to make more informed decisions and choices. So
Yes.
that's the second one.
And I'll build on that just a little bit more because you're right. Like part of this is we could pull in our prior resumes, right? Part of this is literally pulling into someone's profile, their Salesforce data, like the KPIs around
Yeah.
how they've been performing.
Yeah.
If we as leaders, and this is important because I think often leaders do struggle with this, but it's another area that HR can really support. How do we define success on this team, right? If we can articulate how we define success on this team, particularly for those that aren't as black and white as sales is, you upload that into everybody's file. Everybody who falls into this team, this is how we define success. AI is so smart that if we even put in, and again, the right guardrails would have to be there, but if you gave AI access saying anytime this employee is on a G Sheet or a Google Doc with two or more other people, assume that's a
Yeah.
project, right? Or we create a titling system that represents like project documents, AI could scrape that document and say, Shweta has demonstrated these skills in this project that she recently did, like even without that person knowing they
Yeah.
did it necessarily, right? Like it just gives us this incredible, new, deep way to assess what your people are already demonstrating, blended with what they've said they want. And that's incredible. It's never ever been the case.
It totally is incredible. AI is the cognitive power horse that we were looking for. Cannot like on an individual basis. We can't make sense of this vast amount of data. And then the more data we collect, the more hidden patterns AI has the potential to uncover. It has the potential to give us answers to questions that we might not have even thought about yet. So it's incredible times that we are living in. And what happens at the end of the day, again, I'm kind of bringing it back to manager enablement.
Yes.
Imagine every manager having a Moneyball type card for their employees, where engagement data is there, where their
Yes.
productivity data is there, their aspirations, their skills data, and all the different data that we are collecting is sitting in one place for manager. And now they get into a conversation together. How much more richer that conversation is
Yes.
going to be versus managers spending 80% of their time just figuring out which data points and signals should I collect and what type of conversation should I have. So
Right.
80% time hunting and gathering for information, and 20% in actually having an effective, meaningful conversation was the reality before AI.
Yeah, exactly. And similar to this, I think was such a game changer for role kickoffs, right? And in my last role, I also led the talent acquisition team, and a woman on my team suggested that we do the role kickoffs before we create the job descriptions. So what we did is we would have our managers drop into a Google Doc like a bunch of different job descriptions, but then the relevance of what we're talking about here is because we could go onto this call and we knew we didn't have to take notes because it was being transcribed, it made the conversation so much richer. Instead of the recruitment team being order takers or just sort of like writing what the manager thought they wanted, the recruitment team could channel energy into, well, why do you think you want that? And what does that actually look like in practice? And where have you seen that to be relevant on the team already? And what about this aspect? Is that missing? Do you have it already? Like you could have an actual conversation. Same happens for managers, right?
Yeah.
Now these conversations can be the follow up questions. What brought you here? What piqued this interest? What have you experienced in other roles that you think already demonstrate you're beginning to understand how to do this, right? Like this time that was previously spent finding the information, writing down the information can now be dedicated towards being thoughtful and curious and demonstrating an invested interest in the people that you're working with.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And here's the example that you chose today is such an indication of how we need to design people systems of the future so that we can
Yes.
stay in, like, our speed and our agility matches the speed and agility with which the business is moving. Old systems and processes and ways of thinking is not going to serve us well in the long term or even in the short term, I would say. So I now want to zoom into, if this is the kind of solutioning we need to be doing, why is it not happening? Where is the curiosity getting, you know, lost in the mix?
Yes. Part of it goes back, I believe, to what we talked about earlier, which is just this perception of what HR is, being more gut feelings based than data informed. Part of it, I think, is this desire to move so quickly, which seems counter to what I'm saying. But what I mean by that is often because we're trying to create the output as quickly as we possibly can, we're not taking the time to challenge our beliefs. We're not taking the time to present our outputs to others and say, what did I miss? Poke holes in my theory. And that's the work when you think about how we best operate with AI, right? You can ask AI those questions. You can even bring something to AI and say, like, what did I miss, right? What's the risk factor here that I should be addressing with legal or IT? It can tell you. But this frees up the time, again, like the time that you can now spend asking your reports these really thoughtful questions and being curious. This is where the human critical thinking and value really comes into play with this. We now have the time to sit and say, is this right? And if it's not, why is it not? And what is the ethical thing to do in this situation? And who needs to be involved? And what level of permission should they have? And like really asking those hard questions. I don't think we have the excuse anymore of saying, like, we don't move fast enough if we do that. Cause it's like, well, AI just cut our time to do this by over half. So, like, I do now have the time to ask these really critical questions, which will allow us to put out the best result the first go round. Right. And then, of course, you'll change, you'll iterate, you'll evolve what you've built. But those are the questions that help you build something great versus something good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to get into another thinking exercise with you as we get into our last segment for our conversation today. Because you've lived in both HR world and in the business world, and you see the picture from both vantage points. If you were tasked to reimagine what the people function of future looks like, how would you think about the people function, its value, and how would you go about designing it?
I would put so much more emphasis on the data from the get-go. I really think, having worked in the people HR world now for about 12 years, having also been a salesperson, having also been a marketer, right?
Mhm.
That's where I think we've been falling short. And again, like, let's give our HR friends benefit of the doubt, right? Like, part of this is because senior leadership doesn't want to hear it. Part of this is like, you come to them, I've certainly tried, right? Like, and some receive it better than others, where you say, this is what the data says, and this is how it impacts human behavior, and this is how it impacts retention or whatever it might be. And some people say, well, I still want to do it this way because I think it's best for the business, right? Like, there seems to be this disconnect. So to bridge that, I think we first need to identify, like, what are, again, the people programs that correlate to the underlying business needs and outputs. Draw that correlation for your people leaders. Get alignment. I'm sorry, your company leaders. Get alignment on, do we agree that this is the priority of the business? And do we agree that these people systems theoretically have the ability to influence that? Yes, great. Then you go and figure out how we do that. You figure out, how do we tie this to the existing team goals in the areas where the team goals don't exist or they aren't super strong. Then you play another role we really do, which do well, which is go in and help the leaders to create these tangible goals. What does success look like? And then build the systems by which we track this information. And again, AI does this incredible job of pulling together data from lots of different platforms. We can pull in things from your Leaps and pull in things from your Greenhouse, pull in things from Salesforce, right? Like, all of this can come together and you can begin to show, you agreed this had the potential to impact this. I'm now tracking this side by side with what I've built and the changes we make. And I can show you the correlations, and I can show you what's working and what's not working. And I can show you the new areas of opportunity. That keeps up our people programs relevant. I hope it will empower us to have more support in running those programs more effectively, because we'll be able to demonstrate a really tangible value to the bottom line. And at the end of the day, not only do we want to tie all this to business need, we want to tie it to enablement again, right? Manager enablement. Managers are the beginning and end of everything. They are the reason people come to companies, the reason people stay at companies or leave companies, right? And so if we can use what we're building to empower them and draw to their goals and build programs that tie to the bottom line of the business, our value is clearer. The value we know is real is clearer to the individuals who may have previously thought this was all gut.
So, as we wrap up our conversation today, what advice would you give to somebody who sits in a people and culture team and wants to start working towards manager enablement, because that's where they feel like the organization will realize the most value? How should they go about convincing their internal HR leadership for the initiative that they want to run for manager enablement?
I would start with, I'll call them listening tours, really having conversations with the managers that you seek to support to understand their pain points, but also what they are unable to accomplish as a result of not having this sort of support. Where are things falling through the cracks today? And then they can also help you tie that to the bottom line of the business, right? You don't even have to figure out that correlation yourself. Like, they'll know because it's impacting their day to day. As a result of me not being able to do this, my team isn't meeting these goals. We aren't releasing products at the pace that we should or that we're being asked to, right? Those are the data points that give you the power, particularly because, just frankly, like, manager enablement and manager training doesn't always have a good rep. It's often just perceived as like these sort of umbrella topics. And so it can easily be swept under the rug or deprioritized. So that's why I think you really do start with those conversations, how it impacts the bottom line and what the teams could be accomplishing if they had this level of support. That gives you the language and the data, right, to create an argument that other people are already bought into, and that could really impact things in a tangible way.
It. I love it. And which is such a great way for HR teams who are just kind of starting to experiment with transformation initiatives, is to not make it an HR efficiency conversation, but make it a business value conversation and start with business first. I love your advice to the rest of the world who's listening.
I hope it's helpful.
So thank you, Sally. We can definitely explore more examples, and we will revisit this conversation because AI is not stopping. In fact, it is accelerating the pace of change that even people and culture teams are going to witness in very near future.
Yes,
So thank you so much for such a thoughtful conversation with me today.
of course. I always love talking about these things with you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I know we'll continue those conversations here and elsewhere.
And to our audience, if you're listening and thinking about how your organization enables managers or how your people systems actually drive value, this conversation is an invitation to rethink what transformation really requires. And at Tides, we explore the tension shaping work, leadership, and organizational design as they evolve. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.